Alright, so do I have to start this? Yeah.
I
don't even know if we start this joint planning board, I go with the session.
So this is ostensibly DRB hosting, so AJR, like you can kick up off, I think we should start with a round of intros.
Scott says we should start with a round of intros, so let's start with a round of intros. I'm AJ Lorenzo, so the chair of the DRB, and we'll start down there and work our way around the room this way, and this is the joint session of the all boards.
Yeah.
All right.
How are you?
I'm Kirk Dressing, recently joined the city as an associate from there.
And I'm Scott Guston, I manage the city zoning division and a few other things.
Mayor Malone, I'm on the planning commission.
am Jeff Hand, I'm on the development review board.
I'm Caitlin Halpert, I'm vice chair on this one.
I'm Evan Gold, also on the development committee.
I'm Leo Spencer, DRB. Miles Wade on the DRB, formerly on the conservation.
I'm Jay White, I'm on the design advisory board. Dan KLC, land steward, village staff support.
Yeah, class. Mary O'Neill, principal planner, the permitting and inspection.
Were you?
I'm gonna say in order, please.
I'm Watermaker Design Advisory Board.
I'm Bill Ward, I'm the director of the permitting and inspections department.
Zoe Richards, Conservation Board.
Alan Richard, conservation board.
I'm Andrew Montrose, chair of the planning.
I'm Rebecca Roman, Chair of the Conservation Board. I'm Dale Zaria on the Conservation Board.
Hi everybody, Maggie Callahan, Housing Program Manager for CEDO.
Hi, Stella Jordan, Senior Planner at the Office of City Planning.
I'm Sarah Morgan, People Planner and Office of City Planning.
Joseph Cava, zoning permit technician, Department of Permitting and Inspections.
Charles Dillard, Director of Office of City Planning.
Okay, introductions. So let's see, by my count, we have about 24 people here. There's 8 pizzas there. So you might not be able to gorge yourself, but you won't start here. And there are drinks behind it. So Sarah, I'm gonna defer to you to pick on some of the topics for the discussions.
Neat, okay.
Yes.
Hi. When we were Scott and I were talking about this, we put together, and I don't know, should we do pizza like I'm getting a first, or should we dive in? We have a PowerPoint together.
Dive in the PowerPoint.
Perfect. Okay, great.
You
I
won't be offended.
Okay, great. So our team put together, just for city planning, a PowerPoint kind of on recent amendments, upcoming amendments, and just generally our overall planning work over the next that'll be happening over the next year to 2 years. I do need to be made a co-host in order to share that.
Yes. I see you here.
Perfect. And Charles and I are gonna tag team this PowerPoint. Hopefully I don't make problems.
So
Yeah, I encourage the planning commissioners here to also jump in as you see fit. Awesome. Okay, great. I'm going to turn it over to Charles to introduce this stuff and just have a state of the planning office.
We are a small, very mighty office of 3 planners. My name is Charles again. I'm the director. Sarah is the principal planner. And Stella Jordan, who started in October, is our senior planner. We, some of you may know, have recently relocated to sit within CEDO. We see this as a very positive move. It's part of the mayor's Modern Gov initiative. The goal of which is to improve efficiency, collaboration, and city government. There was some reorganization for several departments in fiscal year 25 and in fiscal year 26, and which we are in now. Planning has been one of the two focus departments. The goals of this ModGov move have been to co-locate city planning staff with the city's main housing staff. It gives us greater administrative capacity and also gives planning a great new team of colleagues. We frankly were a little bit lonely sitting in the first floor of City Hall, and move has given us a lot of good opportunities to engage with our colleagues. Maggie Callahan is here tonight. We'll also say that the ModGov effort is not over, that there are ongoing conversations about further reorganizing the city's planning functions more broadly, as well as looking at the development review process and continuing the great work that Director Ward and others at the city have undertaken in recent years to streamline development and stand up a one-stop shop in the city. We're gonna talk about the sort of biggest initiatives, projects that have been in our office in the last year or so. It's not exhaustive by any means. There's a whole lot of other things going on. One thing that's not listed here that is big development in the state is the Community Housing Infrastructure Program, or CHIP, and planning, as well as the city's capital program manager have been working on a policy that the city will use to consider individual CHIP applications. So that is likely to be an area of focus as well in that coming.
I'm happy to get the
Yeah,
recap. Sure. All right, great. So we've got, just wanted to do a quick recap of amendments from FY25. We had 6 total that went through, and deeply appreciate our colleagues in DPI who helped us really work through a lot of these. The biggest, or most substantial one, I'd say, was Neighborhood Code Part 2, additional housing development options. This one, I'm sure you're seeing a lot or you've seen some discussion around in your work. This one really focused on adjusting our PUD standards to reflect new neighborhood code work, allow for pocket neighborhoods, townhouse standards, additional housing development opportunities. Well, followed by several other smaller, but no less impactful amendments. Taking a look at stormwater standards in the SCID to make sure that the standards are implementable. Some work on performing arts centers, Champlain College bed counts, a form code amendment to downtown parking setbacks, and an amendment to reflect the changes that were made through the impact fees last year. And looking ahead, we have 4 amendments that we are kind of tracking right now. We had one that we are kind of tabling for further discussion, but what we have now, we've got 1 adopted, technical corrections and minor amendments. Downtown fences. I'm sure, I'm hoping that my colleagues in the DRB are familiar with that conversation. That has made it after, Andy, how many months in the planning commission? And shout out to David and Jay for joining the Planning Commission Ordinance Committee and discussing that. That is with the city, that is being heard for the first time with the City Council Ordinance Committee this coming Friday. And we have 2 relatively substantial amendments that we are working on. Now we have one on the long-awaited, highly anticipated inclusionary zoning amendment package, and we have another on transportation demand management, which I am happy to go into more depth on. Or I'm going to get Charles to go into more depth on the IZ amendment.
Sure, and either of you feel free to step in. And Maggie as well.
Maggie as well.
And just background on the zoning amendment process for those of you who don't know, the Planning Commission invests a great deal of time in these zoning amendments. When somebody approaches the city or we approach ourselves with the idea of a zoning amendment, we typically tell folks, it's going to be a 4 to 6 month process at least. There are some statutory steps involved, noticing requirements that you're all familiar with. So it's a great deal of work. I think this specific zoning amendment, the concepts of this have actually been cooking very slowly for a couple of years now, starting with the previous administration. So just to give you an idea of the amount of work that does go in, the neighborhood code process is one that took a year and a half to get the 3 phases that we've gotten adopted through city council. The South End Innovation District was one that took probably a year or so, something like that. So yeah, just wanted to give that context. Inclusionary zoning was last, which is the city's mandatory affordable housing requirement of most new developments, specifically developments of scale, was most recently updated in 2023, with the last major update occurring in 2019. The goals of this zoning amendment broadly are to modernize our inclusionary zoning standards, particularly to acknowledge what seem to be structural challenges in the United States in development, construction of housing. To reform the payment in lieu system to help bolster the Housing Trust Fund, and also to broadly support the administration's housing strategy to create affordable homes in neighborhoods through the neighborhood code zoning that has occurred, public-private partnerships, and housing on city-owned.
And I will say also with the inclusionary zoning amendment, this is a very comprehensive amendment. And we are going to be looking at different approaches to the process of this. And we also have a really strong staff working group made up of Scott, members of CEDO, our staff, as well as our senior policy and data analyst, Nancy. And so a lot of eyes on this amendment, even before it goes before our planning commission. And really enters this process.
Transportation demand management. For those of you who aren't familiar with what TDM is, we describe it as all of the non-infrastructural programs and services that are provided to residents to help them move around safely, comfortably, equitably, without the need to own a private car, and ideally to reduce vehicle miles traveled, all of the negative consequences that come with that. So the goals of this zoning amendment, which come out of the 2024 TDM action plan, are to learn from other communities, as well as the consultants of that study, to increase the flexibility and efficacy of our TDM strategies. Right now, the toolkit that we have in the ordinance is quite limited, frankly. If we look at more modern, and ours is from 2019, just gives you a sense of how quickly the TDM world is evolving. We're probably looking at sort of a menu of options with a minimum point total, that sort of thing that has to be achieved. We know we need to extend TDM to residential neighborhoods as it's currently structured, and frankly, as TDM exists in a lot of the country, it's really limited to new multifamily developments, and that's just not fair for folks who live in residential neighborhoods. So that's one thing we're looking at. And finally, to improve the equity of our TDM program by addressing challenges related to affordable housing in our current zoning, but also looking at transnationally. Both of those zoning amendments are likely to take, quite some time to get through the planning commission, given their complexity. So we hope to, by the fall, maybe have these in front of city council. If not soon.
I'll also just note, so with these amendments, I know in July, at least the planning commission updates our long range planning and ordinance committee meetings. Miles and Jay are your representatives on the the planning ordinance committee I mentioned earlier. I think we have Zoe and Evan on the long range planning committee. If all of these sound so exciting, if all this work sounds so exciting, I highly recommend really pushing to be members on those committees, because we'll really be utilizing those over the next year or so with all this work.
Sure. So Act Act 47 or the Home Act introduced new requirements for regional and municipal plans. Act 181 specifically changes the state's rules around Act 250 and delegation to cities around that important legislation. You can point that one. It establishes this new location-based process for Act 250 jurisdictional control in designated centers. Right now, the state has this whole quite complex system of centers for the purposes of economic development, and this really tries to simplify and streamline that. This is the proposed future land use map for the purposes of Act 181. Importantly, this is not the future land use map that will be in the comprehensive plan. Our future land use map is much more detailed and descriptive about specific types of uses. This is more, again, for the purposes of the state delegating Act 250 jurisdiction. So you can see, well, maybe you can't see, but there are right now, this map has actually changed a little bit in the last few weeks based on the initial review of the state's land use review board, who's been working with the Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission going through every municipality's map. Downtown will remain a downtown center. The South End Innovation District, just across the street here and up the street on Pine Street, is now a neighborhood development area, and it is proposed to become a downtown center. We're working with the CCRPC and the LURB on likely connecting the downtown with the South End Innovation District to create one contiguous downtown center in Burlington. Cambrian Rise is shown as a downtown center here, but based on the determination of the LURB and I think we agree with this, that will be downgraded and not be a downtown center. One of the requirements is that there be a significant non-residential component to each downtown center, and Cambrian Rise does not have that at the moment. It was never intended to have a really big non-residential component, and now it doesn't have much. All the other light pink areas are designated planned growth areas. So everything in that dark pink or dark purple and pink is now a tier 1B, where projects of 50 units or more, fewer are exempt from Act 250. The darker areas and some of the village centers, so Ethan Allen Shopping Center on North Avenue, a couple others, will be eligible for Tier 1A status, which grants a full Act 250 exemption. Importantly, though, that also means that the city assumes control over any existing Act 250 permits. Burlington is among many communities and regional planning commissions in the state who've advised the state that the legislation is not clear on what exactly that means. UPI staff particularly is quite concerned about the workload that might imply for the city in assuming Act 250 permits existing in Burlington. We have far more than any other community in the state. And the state's aware of this. They do admit this. And so I think that's just something that is being worked on across the state.
Charles, is that one of the reasons why there's so few areas designated as tier 1A? Just surprises me.
Well, actually, all of these areas can be maybe spoke. So everything but the green on this map and the lighter enterprise area could be a tier 1A. And there are many in the community who are advocating that we use that to see that. No community in Chittenden County can apply for Tier 1A status, though, until the Regional Planning Commission has its own map approved, and that won't happen before July 1st at any rate. So that if all goes as planned and the CCRPC land use map is approved in the summer, that's when we would be able to go for Tier 1A status.
I'll also just note, like with that kind of mauve middle pink, we did not choose these colors. These are statewide colors and categories. For the planned growth area, I think you'll see some areas that are the green rural conservation, and one might ask, like, where's Letty Park, or why is that in this like planned growth area? The state has some great videos and FAQ pages that dive into this more, but and that we're happy to send all that to Scott and Mary to circulate. But when thinking planned growth area, we were thinking the fabrics of the neighborhoods as per the state. So what makes up a neighborhood area, that planned growth area? So it's schools, civic areas, all of that. So that's what the planned growth area kind of means, and you see that on there.
So if the parks aren't included and they are as green areas and they are encompassed in this planned growth area, does that give a green light for development in all of the parks that aren't included on here?
No, because we still have our underlying zoning that has the RCO districts.
Yeah. And I had to modify the slide because our housing target had been just above 7,000 a few months ago, and CCRPC noticed an data error that actually pushed our housing target, our 2050 housing target, to just below 7,000 units. For context, that is about 285 units per year, where we've been building 77 per year, so it's about 4 times the rate. And obviously, this is just a target, but the more fundamental goal here is to materially reduce the housing burden to Burlington's communities and every community across the state. So the middle target is the number that we have to include according to statute in the comprehensive plan. Every municipality here and every municipality in Vermont is required to do the same. Just a little bit more context. South Burlington actually has a bigger target than we do, by about 600 units. Winooski has quite a heavy lift as well. 1,300 units, Essex Junction about 3,000. So across the county, this would represent, a pretty significant increase in the number of housing units, but hopefully a commensurate reduction in housing costs for folks.
And we're happy to come back and provide more discussions on this, but as we're diving into the comp plan, I don't remember if we included slides on the data, but when looking at all the municipalities within Chittenden County and looking at the number of units built per 1,000 residents, Burlington has been building at the same rate, second to last at just above Charlotte. So happy to share some data there as well to just provide context.
Let me ask that again. So the target is 200, what's that number, 200 per year? 285. And we're building currently how many?
77. That's
So it's a 4x increase.
5-year average, 4-year average.
Have you done an assessment on just like land use scale, where you're gonna fit 7,000 units of housing?
Okay, great question. The comprehensive planning process that's starting right now includes a scenario planning phase that will look at multiple different scenarios of housing growth. Just as an example, this won't be one of the scenarios. Let's say one of the scenarios allocates 80% of growth in downtown. What would that mean for parks? What would that mean for land use, for zoning downtown? That is going to be one of the processes that we use to understand land use, zoning. I don't want to make sure that we are set up to accommodate this type of growth. We know that the Secord development, which phase 1 was submitted a couple weeks ago, if fully implemented at 1,400 units, which is the goal, that would be 20% of our 2050 housing target. So it's not a small project. The remaining, units to come in Cambrian Rise and some of the other planned unit developments would represent a significant chunk of that. But it is clear that this is going to take all types of housing across the city. It's going to take figuring out a way to implement the neighborhood code and get some infill housing in our neighborhood. It's going to take looking at, office uses downtown potentially, and whether any of those converted, and frankly, the university's housing growth is included in this as well, so everybody has a role to play.
So that includes university housing, does that also include extra types across the spectrum, like 7,000 one-bedroom apartments?
this
It's
was-
not gonna have the same impact.
No, this was one of my biggest disappointments with the state methodology here is that it's that take on the type of units, and I thought a much more thoughtful approach would have been to figure out a precise need. And be able to set up a process to recalibrate that every 5 years and, what we need to build. Because you're right, 7,000 studios is not the same as a diverse dynamic mix of housing types that achieve the needs of everybody. The Burlington's 2026 housing strategy, as established by Mayor Stanek, is a three-pronged approach to accelerate housing production while centering equity, affordability, community stability, and democratic participation. Again, a goal is to set us on the path to creating these 7,000 units by 2050, in line with all of our goals as expressed in our top plans. The three main planks of this are to revitalize our legacy tools, including inclusionary zoning and the Housing Trust Fund, which we touched on earlier. Activating the neighborhood code. Burlington is not alone among communities across the country who have rewritten residential zoning laws only to see development come and continue to be at a paltry pace. There are other reasons why infill housing is not happening, and we need to explore what those reasons are and confront the challenges that we have control over. But I want to be frank here that part of the reason why housing is so expensive, or some of the reasons, are out of our control, and construction costs and some other sort of national macroeconomic reasons exist here in Burlington as well. And so we'll do what we can, but we will need folks at the state and national level to play their part as well. The third is to reclaim the public sector's role as a housing leader. It is only in this country when the federal government, particularly, but other state and local governments have played a very forceful role in building housing that we have achieved any matter of equity in our housing market. We've not done that in 100 years or so. And so we're looking at expanding the city's longstanding practice of leveraging public assets for public good, including pursuing public-private partnerships and thoughtfully developing housing on city-owned land to meet community needs. That includes land like across the street, Sears Lane, as well as others. For those of you paying attention to City Council in the last month, on January 12th, the Council adopted a resolution calling for myself and the Director of CEDO, as well as other city staff, to report to the Council on the administration and staff's progress on addressing barriers to housing broadly, and recommending next steps to reduce these barriers, ultimately potentially with the goal of establishing a committee creatively called Burlington Unlocking Infill and Livable Development, or BUILD. Many communities across the country do have similar organizations of experts, affordable housing advocates, developers, architects, engineers, landscape architects, others who can share diverse perspectives about how to tackle some of these challenges. And so this is something that I think the City Council would love to explore, and will be supportive.
Happy to jump in. We're going to talk a little bit about one of the recent planning efforts that we're hoping to bring up for adoption in the coming months. We're getting it in the final stages now, and also touch on the comprehensive plan. Diving in, we are wrapping up the planning effort for Plan BTV New North End, focused on is anyone here familiar with Plan BTV South End, the South End neighborhood plan? Great. That was done in 2019. This is the New North End variation of that, and we are hoping that following the Plan BTV 2050 comp plan effort to really then dive into other neighborhoods besides South End and New North End for similar efforts and really kind of bolster our small area plans. So this one's really focused on identity of the New North End, transportation, mobility, balancing the need for growth with the need for green space, and also identifying potential areas of growth. We have a very strong vision statement as well as different strategies on how to make this happen. Many of what is available online on our website. So I am going to quickly go through it. We have a very interactive story map on there as well. So a big piece of it is the mobility element of Plan BTV New North End, which really envisions this map on the right of different pathways, pedestrian and bike facilities, mobility hubs, which is a transportation demand management term, which you might hear a lot of, and also different wayfinding points, which is particularly exciting. I don't know how many of you are frequently on the bike path over the summer, and how many people are there. How many of you will go on to North Ave and really take advantage of all the spaces that are there? So really trying to make the New North End a very an area that is highly mobile and has a lot of really great stuff up there. That involves re-envisioning North Ave as well, and with some of the different options on the left there. Again, happy to share websites and links to all of this with Stott. We have 5 different focus areas that we're looking at. These were identified by both Plan BTV 20 Comprehensive Plan in 2019, that process, as well as the community engagement that was done for this project. This looks at Ethan Allen Plaza, the North Ave Alliance Church property, North Avenue at Plattsburgh, and also identified by community members was the kind of area of Star Farm Park that is less programmed park space, and as well as the Ethan Allen Park front green space, which really comes from a desire for realigning that intersection. Again, happy to share share more resources on this with feedback forms and everything on our website.
Where is that in process?
This we're getting the writing part done now and are reviewing the language, and then we're going to bring it back for a final wave of public engagement and final feedback wave once we have that together, and then we'll bring it forth to Planning Commission, then hopefully refer to the City Council.
Is that like a summertime finish line?
Late spring.
Yeah.
And then update on Plan BTV 2050.
Just time check, how long?
People start to nod off and it's time to quit.
I think it's our last.
Do my
one.
best.
Yeah.
And then we have Bill Ward here to talk about problem properties. We're getting split too.
Okay, and we've done.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, Plan BTV 2050. This is not just an update to Plan BTV, which is our comprehensive plan, which is also an umbrella for a lot of the other plans that have happened. It is a coordinated effort that integrates, like I said, an update to the comprehensive plan, a truly unprecedented comprehensive economic development strategy. Believe it or not, Burlington has never had a comprehensive citywide economic development plan. This will be the first. An update to the 2015 Park Recreation and Waterfront System Plan, as well as I would also say unprecedented transportation plan. There is a 2011 transportation plan. It is very important. It led to many great things, including Great Streets Initiative and some others, but it was quite high level. This is going to be a much more detailed, descriptive transportation plan for the entire city. We are required to update the comprehensive plan statutorily every 8 years. Plan BTV was adopted March 25th, 2027, so we have just over a year to complete and adopt a plan. The other 3 will likely be completed and move through the approval process in the summer of 27. But when we knew that all of these plans were coming, you know, the transportation plan itself was called for by resolution of the council. The park system plan, being 10 years old, is in need of an update. The Parks Department has to have a current plan in order, in many cases, to receive grants, for example. And the economic development strategy is one that has been mentioned in resolutions by the council and is widely regarded as being needed. And so we knew that these were all coming at the same time rather than doing them all separately, in the interest of doing things holistically, but also respecting the community's time and not asking them to come to multiple important meetings every month for the next year and a half. We decided to combine this work. Obviously, these are all interrelated. Housing very much impacts how people get around. Where parks are obviously determines where people want to live, so on and so forth. The Office of City Planning will oversee the efforts. Project managers from CEDO, Parks, Recreation, Waterfront, and DPW will manage their respective elements. We do have a project charter, which is basically a constitution governing this plan internally. And it has buy-in from all of the departments, the mayor's office, and the Office of Racial and Law. We don't need to really go into all the details about the separate phases of this work. Just leave it here. Our consultant team is going to be in town next week. Ella has taken on the task of coordinating this method effort. There's going to be, there are 2 consultants who are local on the team, but otherwise we have 6 coming from outside of Burlington, outside of Vermont, to come spend 4 or 5 days in Burlington and tour around and meet with folks. The rest of phase 1 includes, you know, firming up the community engagement plan, getting a lot of the logistics settled for the work. The phase 2 assessment work. So as is common in most every plan that we do, there's a lengthy assessment of existing conditions. Each of these plans would have one on their own, because nobody knows Burlington better than Burlington and city staff. We've taken on much of this work. We were able to reduce the consultant fee by about $60,000 to $70,000 by accomplishing this in-house, mostly. The comprehensive plan and particularly is nearly complete. The assessment there, CEDO, Parks, Recreation, Waterfront, DPW have completed portions of theirs. That's really the point at which the consultant will understand our community and start to draw out identified trends that exist in our community and interrelationships between the multiple elements. The vision and engagement period, while there's going to be community engagement throughout the planning process, this will be the phase that engagement is most concentrated. Scenario planning I mentioned earlier, this is going to be a big portion of the plan. We asked for this specifically in the request for qualifications. We have a consultant with international experience leading scenario planning who's going to be leading up that effort. And again, that will help sort of translate broad community visions into a framework for planning that allocates space and resources and really sets the stage for parks, including new parks, areas to be conserved, mobility networks, where housing will go, where economic development should occur, what type of economic development should occur. And then after that, once the community is able to engage with the scenarios and identify a scenario for the future that is has support, we will work with the consultants to develop out the plan and ultimately use that. Again, the comprehensive plan we aim to complete by December of 26, so that it can go through the approvals process by March. The other 3 plans will continue on until the summer of 27. So a lot of opportunities for you all to engage for the next 18 months. Yeah, maybe the team slide. These are the firms that are gonna be leading this work. Interface Studio is a nationally recognized planning and urban design firm out of Philadelphia. Burrow Happold is an international consulting firm who will be leading the scenario planning and a lot of the sort of sustainability focused work. Vinaigrette Partners is the economic development consultant. Tool Design is the largest mobility planning firm in the country. They're a woman-owned business who do great work. I think a lot of us are really familiar with Tool. Tool is now working on the transportation demand management plan for the Planning Commission, among others. And Smart Mobility is a Vermont-based, really nationally leading transportation modeling firm. And they're going to be doing a lot of the modeling for transportation purposes in this plan. The project cost total is 600. It's actually a bit below 640,000 across 2 different contracts. The City of Burlington's contract covers the comprehensive plan, the Parks, Recreation, Waterfront Plan, and the Economic Development Plan. And then the Regional Planning Commission holds the second contract for the mobility element. There's a breakdown. I don't think we included it here. Maybe it is here, but just I think over half of the money total comes in the form of grants. So state, local, and federal grants, or state and federal grants rather. For this work, there are some local matches. However, a large portion of the project budget is grants.
Covers our slides.
I guess that's it.
Yeah.
A lot.
So I have a question about, can I jump in? A question about engagement with the process. And I assume I know the answers, but I'll ask for those in the room. So what are some of the primary best ways for individuals and groups to engage as any one of these moves forward?
We're right now working with Stella's leading an effort for our internal team on we put together a very in-depth kind of city engagement plan framework that talks about the city from the city side, what our engagement values are and what our goals for each phase are, and on the timeline of the next 18 months, what those look like. And now that we have our contract with our consultant, we're going to be working with them on how to really inject their energy and ideas and creativity into this effort. And one of the reasons we chose this consulting team is because they have such strong and exciting engagement ideas. We are going to get started on that. We did an initial first touch point on some visioning activities this last, I believe, October, and gauging thoughts on what has worked well with the different plans, what hasn't, what people are looking for in the new plans. But to answer your question, we have a sign up for more information link on our website, and we'll be releasing a pretty complete engagement plan outlining all the different opportunities in the coming month or two.
So do you want to talk to me more? Like we've also got focus groups we're going to be standing up. You all will be engaged here at words. The project advisory committee includes a representative from the Planning Commission who has to be here tonight. 4 city councilors, Parks Board, DPW Commission, GMT, REIB, the mayor's office, one more, I'm not sure. So yeah, focus groups, a lot of the other boards and commissions of the city will be engaged in their capacity. The public will generally be invited to engagement. The scenario planning is one area where I think we're going to need to draw on specifically the expertise of folks like you all. The scenario planning process is usually include sort of an internally focused sort of expert informed creation of the scenarios. And then it's opened up to the broad community to engage with those scenarios, and so we'll likely be pulling from the Planning Advisory Committee, but also a lot of these boards and commissions to help us create the individual scenarios as part of that work.
And if you all have questions or are looking to get involved, definitely reach out, let us know. Our emails are on the Office of City Planning webpage, and we're definitely open to ideas. We also just released a podcast about this plan, which probably you can find on our website soon, but another way to get some good information about it.
Should we hear from Bill Ward about the problem properties effort and then open it up to questions, comments, discussions?
Sure. Thank you, Scott. So yes, I'm Bill Ward and I run the permitting inspection department. In addition to Scott's zoning team, we also have a trades team that issues building permits, electrical, plumbing, mechanical permits, and a housing inspection team that has the housing inspectors who inspect all of Burlington's nearly 11,000 rental houses. The last few months, the mayor had asked me to pull together a team of our department heads to brainstorm ideas on how we can handle problem properties better as a city. So it's ultimately my responsibility, but it's been in this room the last 3 months. The next third meeting will be this Friday, where we get the department heads and key staff members from different departments to go over a list of not just vacant properties. Those are the ones that a lot of Burlington residents are probably familiar with. The ordinance says those are the buildings that have been unoccupied for 210 days or more. But we're finding there's a lot more distressed properties that may not have been unoccupied quite as long, but they are either underutilized or maybe they're fully utilized, but they are suffering in other ways, whether it's they are physically stressed or there's some financial stress associated with what's happening at the property. We've put together a list of, I've put together a list based on the input from some of the others, and we're tracking about 31 properties currently. The good news is that about half of them don't take much effort at all because they're either fully compliant by paying fees or they have the required permits to be doing what they should be doing according to all the other ordinances. The goal through this work is to try to make things better for all Burlington residents, but the problems come from when these properties are not managed well. And the distressed part of it is that they create problems in the neighborhood. They increase the likelihood of criminal activity in the neighborhood. There are bigger fire risks. They bring down neighborhood property values. They'll discourage other development in the area because it looks trashy because of some of these properties. What we've done is try to pull together a variety of different folks, including non-traditional folks. The fire department works with us pretty regularly when there's an incident, but we've had better and better enforcement efforts in sort of teaming up with the fire marshal. In the last few months, I've inspected 2 separate properties in a joint inspection with the fire marshal, which we really haven't done before. So it's a way to step up our game to let property owners know there's a variety of things that they need to do, and there's a number of things that they need to do to comply with the vacant building ordinance, or if there's other problems that are happening at the property, whether it's increased enforcement activity that the police department lets us know at these team meetings, or there are financial stresses, whether it's overdue taxes through the clerk treasurer's office or some other property, some other issue that the city attorney's office is working on. Pooling all of those different challenges that these properties might be facing gives us the ability to prioritize them. So I'll go back to where I started with the ones that are 50% that are mostly compliant. I'd say very, very little effort that goes into those. It's the ones at the other end of the spectrum I'll spend a little more time on. Not much more time though. Those top three that I look at are the biggest challenges from being empty the longest, the greatest impact. Typically, that's because they're closer to the center of downtown, or because they are the most financially distressed. They are the furthest in arrears for liens that they owe to the city, back taxes, and other penalties that are associated with being in, not in compliance with Burlington's vacant building ordinance. We did raise the fees last year as an effort to try to increase through the city ordinance enforcement. We discourage the continued use of vacant buildings by having a tiered fee scale. So a property that is vacant for a commercial property is vacant for the first year, the fee for that is $1,000 per quarter. But in the second year, if you continue to be vacant, the fee goes up to $1,500. We will look at, and I'll give city council this year an update on where we think that fee should go in the next phase. That may increase further, but we're looking at limits with what other communities have been doing. Some communities have really pushed the envelope and gone up to thousands of dollars per quarter. But we're trying to experiment. What's the right amount that pushes people to come into compliance, do what the people that are in the what I would call the top tier of compliance, the green zone, as I refer to them. What does it take to get them to get the permits that they need, bring the property back into compliance with the regulations, or to sell the property and have it redeveloped? Yes, we had a question.
Yeah, sorry, I just didn't want to interrupt too much, but you said commercial properties, which I think means rental properties, but I think it means housing. I just didn't know if we're talking about housing or actual commercial uses or both.
Great, that's a great point. The problem property and distressed property group is looking at all of the properties. I mentioned that as an example because on the commercial side, the fees are, commercial would be for the purpose of vacant building more than a duplex. So that includes residential and typical commercial properties. But residential properties are included in this list, and those fees start at $750 per quarter, and they increase in year two to $1,000 per quarter. The idea behind that is it is actually easier for us to look at a smaller property. It takes less time, and generally the fee is lower because there's not as much work associated with that. The interesting part about the list of 31 properties that I gave you is that only about half of them are truly residential. There are a total though of 38 residential units in those properties. One of them is probably more famous because it started a few years ago, but 184 Church Street is close to the end of its process. That problem property had, I want to say, over 1,000 police and fire calls during the last administration, and there were a number of enforcement efforts that went into that property, but it was ultimately transferred to new ownership. They did pretty major redevelopment with hundreds of thousands of dollars in gutting and sort of finishing that place, and then they've got some exterior work to do, but they are working on the inside. I expect that will be reoccupied with the original 17 units in a much better fashion in the coming year. So there's more to come in this process, but I thought it was important to let you know, and I guess, Charles and Scott thought it was important too. I covered the highlights of what I wanted to, but I also want to give a minute to answer some questions if you have any. Yes.
For a commercial property that's in seemingly good condition, yet unoccupied, does that go on the list?
Yes.
And so then they would need, the owners of that building would need to find renters. So like on Cambrian Rise, there's empty commercial that we see driving by, but those guys getting fined?
No, so you can let me know about a particular unit that's in there. Any unit that's been occupied, if it's under a permit already, then the vacancy wouldn't start until after the permit gets closed out. But if
For like a new build.
Right, for a new build. So if this is someplace that the building itself may be occupied in some other way, there are places downtown where there are different businesses within the same building. If there's a vacant business within a building that is otherwise occupied, that's not technically vacant per the ordinance. Is that helpful, or I'm not sure
Yeah,
which?
no, I'm just,
Yeah.
I'm just curious, thinking about vacancies in commercial spaces that I think take away from the experience of being a resident, and so I was,
Yeah, and we do have a few of those that we talked about at the last month that Scott and I are looking at, some of them where there's either a change of use because they've gone from what they were prior to being some lesser use that maybe it's just an office use right now. I don't want to get into the specifics because some of these may end up going before boards, but ultimately, we are not trying to force violations on anyone. We're trying to force compliance. If we find that someone is required to do certain things and they're not meeting them, the first step in our voluntary compliance is to give them some written communication that said, it's come to our attention, you're not occupying the property the way you were permitted to. So you either need to revert to the permitted use or cease that, or cease the current use, get back to what you were permitted to, or get a permit to make a change of use. In a place that's unoccupied, or I'm sorry, in a building that is partially occupied, that's where we look at it as potentially a distressed property. We'd work with CEDO or another agency to try to fill that vacancy in the one business that might be, unoccupied in a otherwise occupied building. We really want to have full occupancy as much as we can, but according to the vacant building ordinance, it's the building itself. If the whole building is empty, then it's vacant for the vacant building ordinance. But if there's two commercial operations in one building and only one of them is fully functional, the building would be more distressed according to our definitions, but not vacant because it's the business that's vacant, not the building. Hope that's not too confusing. Yes.
You were mentioning that some portion of these buildings are in distress because of like being in financial arrears, with being and other like penalties from the city or taxes or et cetera. At what point is there enforcement action on that, like versus like just things kind of.
So that's something that stays within the city attorney's office for a final decision. If they owe back taxes, the clerk treasurer's office and our city attorney's office work with the processes they have to either bring their property into a payment plan or they can do a tax sale, sell the property and get, recoup the taxes from that. But I can't speak with 100% clarity on what they do, but I'm certain that this process has sort of elevated some of those properties that otherwise were sort of hiding in the shadows because I wasn't aware of them. But it's really clear to me that I know the problem property exists because they owe us fees and they are causing problems that are creating issues where neighbors are letting us know about it. That further elevates it on our priority list. If I now can see through this process, I can see that they're also delinquent in taxes. That's where we work with the city attorney's office to further prioritize that. And if that's not working, that's why the mayor is part of this group she gets to have the final say on what next steps happen. I've been encouraged by it so far. It's not just because I'm in charge of it. I'm happy because we're seeing some results. I do think you'll see some things coming before your board soon that are actually a direct result of some of us guiding these people into the compliance pen. We really want to have people follow the ordinance, and that'll make better neighbors for all of you and hopefully fix some of those financial gaps that we're hearing about too.
I just want to thank you for what you're doing, because I think a lot of people don't know what to do. And if they get a little bit of guidance, they can do a lot. If they want to do it, they may not know. Thank you.
Appreciate that. And if anyone ever talks to you, I am just like you're seeing tonight. I'm a friendly guy. I don't want to be the enforcer. I want to try to help people. But as you say, sometimes people don't even reach out because they're afraid. That's why we're sending communications. We want to hear back from people. There are a lot of resources within the city. We'll point them in those directions. But ultimately, doing nothing will result in enforcement action, penalties, fees, court action.
But I think they get afraid that if they start to do something, it's gonna have to do more than what they can afford, so they don't do anything.
Yep.
Need to help with that.
Being members of boards, you know, there's due process with all of these things. There are ways for people to.
Want to do the right thing, is what I find.
Exactly. And there are ways for people to get waivers of fees. And with the vacant building ordinance, it's actually the DPW commission that hears those because they typically have to do with engineering issues. But that's been a separate part. I can talk about the appeals there because it will never come before you as far as the fees on the vacant buildings. But just like with your boards, there are appeal levels and there are ways for people to get relief.
Cool, thank you, Bill.
Yeah, thank you.
So tonight was intended to be a two-way street, so I'll say, are there any questions, comments, concerns about what was talked about earlier, queued up? Are there any big things that are missing that should be under consideration?
The one
All
thing
these
that
various
to me, came up for me more for city planning. I don't know that the other boards care about this, but it comes before the
Go for
DRB,
it.
which is signage. We've had like a lot of issues with the sign ordinance and the elements that come before us and the restrictive nature of the sign ordinance. So I would definitely encourage Lorraine.
Yeah. Mary and Scott have been bringing us sign ordinance ideas, I think, for 4 years, and you know, we know it's an issue. Yeah, I think, you know, it's safe to say the zoning ordinance is probably at some point in the next, you know, foreseeable future due for a pretty complete rewrite itself, and I think that will need to be informed by this comprehensive planning effort. But yeah, but if there are specific issues with the signing regulations, like we're happy to take a look at them. Yeah, and this is the kind of issue where I think like we'd love to get our planning consultant in front of you so that they can understand like some of these.
I mean, the biggest one, which is very specific, is like the allowance for tenants not on the first floor.
Yeah.
Is incredibly restrictive.
Could you speak up again, please?
The requirements for any tenants or anything on the second floor of the building are very restrictive, sign opportunities.
All right, sorry, just one quick question. The historic preservation plan changes, is that rolled into the comprehensive plan or is that a priority for next year? Or?
The preservation plan is on pause right now. We are regrouping there but goal is still to complete the plan by the end of the year and got our CLG coordinator here, Mary O'Neill, so she's gonna be helping lead that effort along with Sarah and Stella in our office and others in the city. So yeah, it's a priority to finish the plan and to have it be consistent with the company.
I think that effort is gonna be timely with, you know, the efforts, the overarching efforts of the comprehensive plan, and we're gonna be able to roll everything in together. Take advantage of public engagement sessions and you know, bring all of this before the public. So our little skip in our activities was unforeseen, but we're picking up, regrouping, and we're going to continue.
I had something, Rebecca Roman, board chair for the conservation board. I sent a memo previously about Plan New North End and the board's position on proposed development within the parks. And I was curious, one, to see more of the feedback from the initial outreach in the New North End. I was curious, this is a question that could just be answered right now, if you're incorporating feedback that people put on Front Porch Forum. I know that's a big feedback outlet. It doesn't need to necessarily, it can to outweigh other feedback, but I do think it's important feedback to be incorporated. And I have a lot of curiosity around how the feedback is being incorporated. And I just wanted to take an opportunity again at this meeting to express that I do not want to minimize the housing crisis that we are in. I am a renter. I'm currently looking for housing. It's impossible, and there are like landlords you don't want to rent from because they're charging millions of dollars for moldy homes. Like, we are in a housing crisis. Everyone on the board, the conservation board, understands that. And we also recognize that we live in a city, so we would never propose conserving or protecting a green space that a new green space that would be good for development. Look at the proposals at Barge Canal. We've never really stood in the way of Barge Canal and progress there. But I do think that it is a poor decision to recommend development at Star Farm Park and this perceived unused corner of it, because our climate issues are longstanding issues that have been around for over 40 years, and they're going to be into the future. And our housing crisis is a problem that's right now. And to get rid of green spaces, which create climate resiliency, we just wrote an entire open space plan about it that was adopted. We need to stay focused on those being really attainable climate goals and not just bulldozing over what some may perceive as low quality green spaces, because all green spaces serve a purpose, whether or not we humans perceive them as serving a purpose. So just wanted to mention that again. And I'm curious to see how the rest of the community responds whenever the plan comes out and you do your second round of public input.
Yeah, we've had many rounds of public input on that. And just to be clear, the idea of building housing in parkland or other city-owned land didn't just come from South City planning. A lot of that came from the community itself and our engagement. We will be compiling sort of comprehensively the amount of feedback. But I would say that from January of early 2026 through July, August time period, we did a lot of in-person engagement, online engagement on all the topics in Plan BTV North End. And the in-person engagement, not surprisingly, was much more nuanced and constructive than what was heard online. It also greatly outnumbered what happened online. I don't want to diminish anybody's perspective that was shared online, but I would say we had 60, 70 people come to multiple in-person meetings and engage on this topic in a really constructive way that was really helpful. And even those people who straight up just don't like the idea at all, it was easier to have a conversation about these concepts with them in person. And a lot gets lost online. We all know that. So the numbers, I think we can tabulate the numbers, like those in support versus opposition. But my sense is that there were more people who said, oh, this is an interesting idea. I'm not outright opposed to it. I'm interested in learning more. There were some people who were outright opposed to it, and there were some people who said we should be building this now, too, for many reasons. Second, so I also just want to, I hope folks understand that we certainly don't see housing and conservation as a zero-sum game. And even, let's say if the idea about building some homes in a portion of Star Farm Park to come to fruition, the concept that we shared actually increased the tree canopy in Star Farm Park and increased the amount of stormwater management, best management practices in Star Farm Park. You know, we shared one of the concepts and, you know, one of the first drawings. Sort of did away with that, this, where the skating rink happens in the winter on at Star Farm Park, right in the front edge of the park. And I had somebody come and said, oh, I love the idea of housing here, but that's a really important community space for us in the neighborhood. And so like, could you just think about conceptually about how to retain some of these? So we told our consultants, yeah, this is what we've heard. They actually drew back in the splash pad, which we know we're going to need more of in Burlington as we more out and in the lake and swimming, you know, isn't possible as much in the future. And also it's not a zero-sum game in that we know that if we were to replace some open space with housing or community facilities, I also want to be clear that this isn't just about building housing. I think we clearly need more community facilities in Burlington for all types of people. There's a whole sort of generation of community infrastructure, new ideas that have sprung up around the world that we are not taking advantage of. You know, spaces specifically designed for mothers or people with children to be able to care better for kids in neighborhoods, that sort of thing, which we just don't have in Burlington or frankly, the United States. And so we want to be pretty clear that, you know, if any open space land was eliminated again in, you know, for housing or something else, we would very much look across the city for new opportunities for park land as well as conservation space. We know there are parts of the east end of Burlington, for example, that are extremely underparked. Shemansky Park is the only park, city park on the east end. Of course, UVM has some open spaces that are accessible to folks. But the fact of the matter is that we need to more equitably distribute parks across Burlington. And that's, I think, gonna be a big goal of our office. I think personally, I think everybody on my team feels this way as well, is that we need to look at depaving as well. We have lots of rights of way in this city that are reserved for storing people's cars, which don't move many times. And that is a huge missed opportunity for climate resiliency. So there's a lot that we can do. There's a whole process that has to take place for the city to build housing on any land. 68 Sears Lane, which is a parking lot, or an open space. And we have to do legal due diligence to even find out if it's legally possible or what legal barriers would we need to remove. We would need to do a lot of community engagement. I think part of our conversations and our goal is frankly to do away with the sort of standard request for proposal process and think radically about procurement and learn from other communities around the world and how they procure social housing specifically and do engagement at a time when it can inform directly what is built and what can't be built. Something we haven't mentioned is that, you know, CETO and planning have been engaged in a collaborative effort with two other American cities, New Haven and Poughkeepsie, with 3 cities in Germany to explore topics of bio-based building materials, social housing, and circular economies. And we are very much interested in creating procurement processes that prioritize those types of things. You know, for example, you know, if we wanted to build 80 units on any given city-owned plan, could we? And we've asked this of New Frameworks. Some of you might know New Frameworks in the room, but they're a great Vermont-based company that is building straw wall panels. It's a really tremendous bio-based building material. We asked them, let's say we created an RFQ that required the use of straw panels for construction. Do you even have the capacity to create 80 units? And they said, yes, we have the supply, we just need the demand. And so that's the kind of thing that I think we would. But yeah, I mean, as we continue this plan, if the community's response, and obviously the city council's response is that, you know, exploring constructing housing in Star Farm Park or any other park is, you know, not something they want to pursue, then we would pull back on that.
Yeah, and I'll just reemphasize that we are in support, the board is in support, especially of the Ethan Allen proposal, that's so great, it meets so many metrics, we're in support of building on city-owned land, I think the request and the desire is do not get rid of our green spaces when the city owns, I think, something like 7 lots. Why not prioritize developing on that already paved over, destroyed land over the green spaces, and hear everything you're saying around
Yeah.
that.
I think that makes a lot of sense.
I also think just, I'm, I live in a neighborhood and I'm in support of like using some of that land, but I think one of the things to just remember too is like. These things have externalities, and so like avoiding like high density housing here. Has a lot of like negative effects because it increases VMT and greenhouse gas emissions, and it paves over actual like. Fully forested spaces in more far-flung places, and so like, yes, it's green space here, but just thinking about like climate resiliency from like a broader perspective of like statewide and the impacts that like those changes in decisions can have in that process as well.
I think there's a few perspectives on that point exactly, I don't know that that's necessarily true about. I don't necessarily. See that playing out in the way that you're describing in Vermont, and I work throughout the whole state, so. Just that's perspective, I also have a perspective. I'd love to see the data around it if we're gonna use that as a hard point for why we should get rid of green spaces, which have cascading impacts down the waterways.
I'm happy
and
to
our
discuss.
water quality and things like that,
Yeah.
so.
And maybe I could just add something, which is, and I think when we brought the open space plan before the planning commission, one of the things that we talked about is, you know, we do a lot of evaluation of city infrastructure, you know, like we know how many axles there are in the city and how many staff we have to support, you know, fixing all that sort of stuff up. But there's a lot of green infrastructure in the city that we take for granted, and I don't wanna mix this up with Star Farm, it's maybe irrelevant to Star Farm, but I wonder if like a really good path forward is having, you don't invest in an economic analysis of the value of like, some of our like forested areas within the city. So they provide a huge amount of cooling, carbon sequestration. We map and monitor a lot of that stuff in terms of like our emissions, so we know a lot of details and science, but that we don't do very much of that within the city. We can do that kind of an economic analysis. I think it would be a really great background, so we don't have as much like back and forth. Is this valuable? What's the trade-off here? We're kind of working with a little more data. And I think that could be really useful. Like who's for like Trust for Public Lands do that. Get sort of the value that's returned back to you by certain kinds of open spaces, what some of the risks to them would be. So I think that could be a really interesting, relatively low cost path to go forward that just gives us a little more data and maybe puts everybody a little more on the same team sometimes. So I think that I did mention that when we came to planning commission, maybe some interest in that. And I was gonna talk to Sarah about that anyways. There's someone I contact with the Trust for Public Lands. We should talk about that, but it might also give, I mean, on a positive flip side, I think it might also give some, you know, we talked about in the open space plan, like having more of a green design standard in new development. And it might give us a little bit more of an engine about what that would be, what are some of the benefits and sort of cost benefits. So I think there's that, like, we know we need more splash pads. We're not gonna save the lake with Burlington practices alone, but we're a piece of that. And so I think there really is balance there. So we need the development, we need to know what's most valuable and important, and where that infringement is gonna be a problem and where it's not gonna be a problem. And we just need more data behind that, I think. And I think it'll help us.
I really like that. I want to talk about
Yeah.
I really like that idea about this analysis.
Yeah.
And to lay something out, particularly for new development.
Yeah.
I mean, I just wrote 2 DAB reports today, and we're pretty skimpy on what we're requiring for landscaping at new development.
Right.
And it's vague. So I have always felt that this lack of specific first data to inform and then response through the regulations
Right,
would do so much more to enhance
right,
new development.
yeah, and it really, I think it can really allow us to see where maybe this isn't a good idea, but maybe it just doesn't matter, it's actually really isn't, it's been, so I think.
Yeah, I'm not talking about ribbons and buttons and bows. I'm talking about something with functional
Yes,
service.
Yeah,
In new
yeah.
development.
I actually think we do less of it than some other cities, like Boulder. Does more.
I mean, our language is
You know,
is
so-
good, it's
Yeah.
aspirational, it's not definitive, it's aspirational, but.
It is on the south end improvement district, the SEID, which is different than the whatever core. But I think that what we had talked about at the plan commission last year, someone maybe jump in and here, but like this idea that like Burlington's gonna like come up with this requirement, but I think the sense, at least I have, is like, let's use someone else's requirements and just
Alter, yeah.
you know, like why go through the work?
Well,
You
yeah, you
clearly
don't
are
have to
limited.
replow the field if somebody else has already done it.
Exactly, and I think there are a bunch of those standards in the SEID requirements, but I don't know how they sync up for, what is the term that you're talking about, that inventory of the economic value? There's like a term for it.
Ecological economics.
No, that it's like the.
No, I think there's another term, but I.
Ecosystem
There
services, there it is.
That's it.
But
Yeah.
yeah, I think that getting what the value is of the green space would be huge when we're making choices about where to build.
Right, and okay, well, this is a really valuable green space because, you know, here are all the values of its services. And therefore, you know, degrading it a little bit is actually much more costly than doing something somewhere else, but we don't have that, so we get into like, it's not gonna be a problem, well, I think it is gonna be a problem, well, it's not gonna be a problem. So I think we wanna, bringing a little bit more data to it's gonna help us, and we're disinclined to do that, I mean, we don't like to think about nature that way, but I think it's very. We go
I'd
forward.
love to engage the conservation board on data indicators that we can employ in the scenario planning process. One indicator that I'm really interested in is embodied carbon. And if we can game out, you know, development over the next 25 years, if we're assuming that it's all gonna be at mid-rise buildings with concrete programs, embodied carbon, we're gonna quickly run out of our embodied carbon budget. You know, there's a lot of research that documents, you know, how much embodied carbon each city could build in order for it to play its part in contributing to not passing over 1.5 or 2 degrees centigrade of warming. And Burlington's, of which I've seen, we really only have 5-6 years left under that, which really does say that we need to actually think more about bio-based building materials and sort of get away as much as we can. Inevitably, concrete and steel have a role to play in the future of Burlington, and they will, and they're important building materials. But yeah, that is a specific data indicator, but others might be, tree canopy or something related to stormwater. I think that you guys are the experts on it. So yeah, we'd love to talk with you about like what kind of data is.
And I'm not an expert, I just know that it's out there, and I think like.
I thought you were an expert.
Bird, actually, but which will not help in this discussion, but I do think, you know, just so much interesting stuff out there about the fact, like, if you think about, well, Burlington is a very quickly heating city, we're 4th or 5th right now. And there are plans for urban areas where you can, like, if Burlington's heating at a rate of 4 or 5 degrees in the summer. And through a strategic tree planting, you can drop temperatures 4 or 5 degrees in the city, you could net cool the city, right? Even in the face of climate change. So it's like, how do we make sure that we're investing in all of this as we're going along? And you get all these other benefits of, you know, stormwater avoidance, you know, we're not using as much power, all those kinds of things that I think really need to be integrative as we go for this. But none of us are the experts and have the data on hand, so like, how do we get, I just wanna make sure that that's part of this plan. And you know, some areas provide so much more natural function within the city than others do. And we just have to have some sort of a count of that.
so we can make the best decisions as possible. And I know Trust for Public Lands does a fair amount of that. They are like an urban-based conservation group. They're about healthy urban areas, and so it could be good to start investigating a little bit with them. I don't know.
I just wanna jump off of some of this conversation, pivot a little bit on what you said, Aaron, of using standards that have been developed by the experts, and I think overall that is something that I would like to see in like BTV 50. It reminds me of another issue that an architect friend of mine brought up multiple times, which is our lighting standard in the zoning ordinance, which is like, as he's explained to me, very convoluted and made up and doesn't seem like a way that is useful to people designing projects. And I think we end up in that place a lot because we have this very interactive process that is designed by committee, which doesn't mean it leads to the best possible place. And I think agreeing on who the experts are that we want to point to, so enlightening Stark Skies and finding all of those that we agree on and point to their standards, and they're responsible for managing those standards as they change over time if you don't continue to get beyond issues.
Yeah, the lighting standards are very old. And they're kind of a mishmash, and it definitely makes sense to refer to a third party expert group like Place now. But then we need to figure out how to translate that in lighting standards. Or doesn't deal with photo plans.
All right, I guess I have to close the meeting, so I'm gonna do that. So we'll close the joint session. Thank you. Please, if you would, make sure that you keep these links available so people can get more information on the websites. And if you want feedback, at least from the DRB, please ask us. All of us are happy to scenario plan. I can come up with a lot of worst case scenarios to test your assumptions. Don't worry about that for all of us. Thank you for your work. Appreciate it. Say what? Thank you. Thank you.
Yay. I got my head split.
Yeah.